She accidentally sent me a text meant for her sister, just pretending to be pregnant to get him to propose. Classic move. I screenshotted and sent it back with classic breakup. She spent 3 hours calling me crying it was a joke. I, 29M, thought I knew the woman I was going to marry. 3 years together, living together for 8 months, and I believed we had something real. Until Tuesday afternoon changed everything. I was sitting in my office cubicle, mindlessly scrolling through quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. A text from my girlfriend. My heart always did this stupid little skip whenever I saw her name pop up on my screen, even after all this time together. But this message wasn't meant for me. Just pretending to be pregnant to get him to propose. Classic move LOL. He's been so stressed about money lately, but I know he'll cave once he thinks there's a baby involved. Sister, you should see how he's been looking at engagement rings online thinking I don't notice. I read it once, twice, 3 times. Each reading felt like a punch to the gut, harder than the last. My hands were shaking as I screenshot the message. The timestamp, her contact name, every damning word perfectly preserved. I stared at the image on my phone, and suddenly everything from the past 2 weeks started making sense. The morning sickness that only seemed to happen when I was around. The way she'd clutch her stomach dramatically and run to the bathroom, emerging minutes later looking perfectly fine. Her sudden cravings for expensive foods we couldn't afford. The pregnancy test I'd found in the bathroom trash can last week. One she claimed was negative, but wouldn't let me look it closely. I'd been working double shifts at the warehouse, picking up weekend jobs, cutting back on everything just to start saving for a ring. The one I'd bookmarked on 3 different jewelry websites, comparing prices, reading reviews, calculating payment plans. She knew. Of course she knew. My coworker at the next desk asked if I was okay. I must have looked as sick as I felt. I told him I needed some air and walked outside into the parking lot, my phone still gripped in my hand like evidence at a crime scene. For 20 minutes, I sat in my car trying to process what I'd discovered. 3 years of my life. 3 years of believing in us, in her, in what we were building together. I'd introduced her to my parents last Christmas. My mom had already started talking about grandchildren. The pregnancy announcement had come exactly 2 weeks ago. She'd been crying when she told me, saying she was scared but excited. I held her for hours that night, whispering reassurances about how we'd figure everything out together. I'd felt terrified and thrilled simultaneously, already imagining myself as a father. I called my boss the next morning and asked about overtime opportunities. Started looking into bigger apartments we couldn't afford. Began mentally reshuffling my entire future around this life-changing news that was apparently just another Tuesday afternoon lie. My finger hovered over her contact name. Then I typed out my response. Classic breakup. I attached the screenshot and hit send before I could second-guess myself. My phone exploded immediately. Call after call after call. When I didn't answer, the texts started flooding in. Each notification felt like another nail in the coffin of whatever we'd had together. Baby, please answer your phone. It's not what you think. I can explain everything. Please don't do this. I turned my phone to silent and somehow made it through the rest of my workday. My manager commented that I seemed distracted, and I told him I was dealing with a family emergency. In a way, that wasn't entirely untrue. When I got home, she was sitting on our couch crying. The moment I walked through the door, she launched into this frantic explanation about how it was all just a joke with her sister. How they'd been texting about some reality TV show where a woman faked a pregnancy. How she'd accidentally sent me a text meant as commentary about the show, not about our actual situation. I listened without saying much, watching her perform this elaborate dance of desperation. She kept touching her stomach protectively, maintaining the charade even while trying to explain it away. The commitment to the lie was almost impressive. She pulled out her phone, showing me the conversation thread with her sister from earlier that day. There were indeed messages about some trashy reality show. But the message she'd sent me didn't fit the context of those conversations. It was too specific, too personal, too detailed about our actual situation. When I pointed this out, she started crying harder, insisting I was misunderstanding everything. She begged me to believe her, saying she'd never manipulate me like that. The irony wasn't lost on me. I asked her to take another pregnancy test. Right then, in front of me. The color drained from her face. She stammered about how that would be wasteful since we already knew she was pregnant. When I offered to pay for the test myself, she got angry, accusing me of not trusting her. She said I was being cruel and paranoid. That's when I knew for certain. I told her I needed space to think and that I'd be staying at my friend's place for a few days. She followed me around our apartment as I packed a bag, alternating between tears and anger. She accused me of abandoning her and our baby over a misunderstood text message. At my friend's place, I showed him the screenshot. He stared at it for a long time before asking what I was going to do. I told him I honestly didn't know. Update 1. 3 days later, she called from her sister's number, knowing I'd blocked her personal phone. Her sister got on the line first, trying to vouch for her, explaining how they'd been watching this reality show together, and the text really was just commentary about the ridiculous woman on TV. But when I asked her sister specific questions about the show, what network it was on, what the woman's name was, what episode they'd watched, the details kept changing. Finally, her sister admitted she didn't actually watch the show but was just trying to help smooth things over. That evening, my girlfriend showed up at my friend's apartment. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She sat in his living room and finally told me the truth. She wasn't pregnant. Had never been pregnant. The positive test I'd found was her friend's, someone who'd actually gotten pregnant and panicked, asking my girlfriend to help her figure out how to tell her own boyfriend. The morning sickness, the cravings, the emotional ups and downs, all carefully orchestrated. She'd been watching YouTube videos about early pregnancy symptoms to make sure her performance was convincing. She'd seen me looking at engagement rings online and panicked that I was taking too long to propose. Her sister had gotten engaged after just 18 months with her boyfriend, and the family pressure was mounting. She felt like 3 years was long enough and wanted to force my hand. The text to her sister wasn't about a TV show. It was her confessing the truth to someone, probably looking for validation or advice on how long to keep up the charade. She was sobbing as she told me all this, saying she'd gotten in too deep and didn't know how to back out without losing me. She insisted she loved me and wanted to marry me, that the fake pregnancy was just meant to speed up what she believed was inevitable anyway. I asked her how long she'd planned to keep lying. She didn't have an answer. Update 2. I needed time to process everything, so I took a week off work and drove up to my parents' place. I told them the whole story, showing them the screenshot, explaining about the fake pregnancy and the manipulation. My mom was furious. She'd been quietly knitting baby clothes for the past 2 weeks, excited about becoming a grandmother. My dad just shook his head and said he'd had a feeling something was off when she'd called to tell them the news. Something about her tone had seemed strange. During that week, my girlfriend called my parents' house repeatedly. My mom answered once and told her firmly that I needed space and that she should respect that. My girlfriend apparently broke down crying to my mother, insisting it was all a misunderstanding and begging for help to fix things. My mom later told me she'd felt sorry for her until she remembered the knitted baby clothes sitting in her closet, time and love invested in a lie. I spent most of that week hiking with my dad, working with my hands in his garage, trying to sort through my feelings. The betrayal hurt worse than anger. For weeks, I'd been living in a different reality, one where I was going to be a father, where our relationship was moving toward marriage, where the woman I loved was carrying our child. Every conversation we'd had about the future during those 2 weeks had been built on her lie. Every time I'd worked extra hours to save money, every time I'd stressed about our finances, every time I'd felt that mixture of terror and excitement about impending fatherhood, all of it had been manipulation. My dad asked me what I thought I wanted to do. I told him I honestly didn't know if I could ever trust her again. When I came back to town, I found that she'd moved out of our apartment. My friend told me she'd been there multiple times while I was gone, packing her things and crying. She'd left a letter on my pillow. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten, full of apologies and explanations. She acknowledged that what she'd done was wrong, but kept insisting that her feelings for me were real, that her desire to marry me came from love, not manipulation. She wrote that she'd been feeling insecure about our relationship's direction and had made a terrible mistake in how she'd tried to address that. She included printed screenshots of her conversation with her sister from after I'd left, where she'd admitted the truth and asked for advice on how to fix things. Her sister had apparently told her she needed to come clean immediately and accept whatever consequences followed. At the bottom of the letter, she'd written her new address and asked me to consider couples counseling. Update 3. 2 weeks later, I agreed to meet her for coffee. Neutral ground, public place, no pressure. She looked terrible, like she'd been crying for a month straight. She immediately apologized again, taking full responsibility for the lie and the manipulation. She didn't try to minimize what she'd done or make excuses. I asked her if she understood why I felt I couldn't trust her anymore. She nodded, saying she'd spent every day since thinking about how she'd destroyed the best thing in her life over her own insecurities. She told me she'd been going to therapy, trying to understand why she'd thought manipulation was an acceptable way to handle her fears about our relationship. She acknowledged that even if her desire to marry me was genuine, the method she'd chosen was toxic and unfair. I asked her what she would have done if I'd actually proposed because of the fake pregnancy. She admitted she hadn't thought that far ahead, that she'd been planning to miscarry after we got engaged and act devastated about losing the baby. Hearing her say that out loud made me realize how deep and calculated the deception had been. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was an elaborate, ongoing plan to manipulate me into marriage. She asked if there was any possibility of working things out. I told her I needed more time to think. Final update. After another month of reflection, I met with her one last time. I'd made my decision. I told her that while I believed she was genuinely sorry and that her feelings for me had been real, I couldn't move forward with someone who'd been willing to lie to me so extensively about something so important. The trust was broken beyond repair. The fake pregnancy wasn't just one lie. It was dozens of small lies every day for 2 weeks. Every morning when she pretended to be sick, every time she claimed to have cravings, every conversation about our future that she knew was built on deception. What hurt most was realizing that she'd watched me stress about money, work extra shifts, and worry about being ready for fatherhood, all while knowing it was unnecessary. She'd been willing to let me exhaust myself preparing for a future that didn't exist. I also couldn't get past the fact that she'd planned to fake a miscarriage. The emotional trauma she would have put me through, making me grieve a child that never existed, seemed unforgivably cruel. She cried when I told her my decision was final, but she didn't argue or try to change my mind. She said she understood and that she'd learned a terrible lesson about the consequences of trying to manipulate someone you love. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that she was engaged to someone new. I felt a pang of something, not jealousy exactly, but maybe sadness for what we'd lost. I wondered if she'd told him the truth about why her last relationship ended. I'm still single, still working on trusting people again. The whole experience taught me that love isn't enough if it's mixed with manipulation. Real love doesn't require deception or force. When the right person comes along, they won't need to trick me into proposing. Sometimes I still think about those 2 weeks when I thought I was going to be a father. Despite everything, there had been moments of genuine joy mixed in with the fear. I'd imagined teaching a kid to ride a bike, helping with homework, being the kind of dad mine had been to me. Those dreams were real, even if the pregnancy wasn't. Someday I hope I'll get to live them with someone who won't build our future on lies. The screenshot is still saved in my phone. I keep it as a reminder, not of her betrayal, but of the importance of paying attention when someone shows you who they really are. Sometimes the most important messages are the ones that weren't meant for you at all.